Is it high time for Europe to understand that the US isn't its friend anymore?
As of today, we can take it for granted that America is not only betraying Europe, but is currently threatening, because we have been identified as the enemy number one.
How should we, as Europeans, feel about the American capture of Maduro and threats to take over Greenland? Can we defend ourselves?
We have never addressed the key question, which is who is going to take the command?
Should Europe start being a bit more of a bully boy too?
Trump only respects people, interlocutors who are able to project power. And that's exactly what we're not able to do.
And stop telling everyone that we're weak.
We are very good at diagnoses, but we're very bad at acting upon those kind of analyses.
My name is Katy Lee. This is the podcast, The Europeans. Stick with us for a conversation with leading European researcher and analyst Alberto Alemanno. Alberto, thank you so much for joining us.
Always good to speak to the Europeans about what it's like to be a European these days.
We're always very happy to have you. 2026 seems to have gotten off to a very dramatic start as far as global politics is concerned, with the US removal by force of Venezuela's president. What do you make of the way that European leaders have reacted to this rather jaw-dropping move of Trump's and its impact on Venezuelans?
Did they react at all? One might have expected a sort of unanimous voice emerging out of this fact by saying, first of all, this is illegal. This is not the way you move forward. And then you would have also tried to understand that there are major ramifications stemming from that act. I think never in modern history has Europe confronted a threat quite like this one. We were told that Brexit was existential. Then the Euro crisis, then the migration wave. But if anything truly deserves that word, existential, is what Europe faces in 2026 and whether it survives intact. Right? In 2025, Europe became the enemy, not just of Russia, but also of America. And I think that there is a possible risk here. We are threatened because we are European. For what we stand for what we are, for the kind of values we still try to stand up for. And despite this incredible opportunity which is given to us, which is stemming from the Venezuela operation and the ensuing renewed threat to invade or seize Greenland, our national political leaders, they cannot speak with one voice. So this is extremely frustrating, I think, for most Europeans. I think it's very difficult to understand how it is possible that when those red lines are clearly crossed from both a European and international law perspective, our European leaders don't stand up and they don't say, this red line has been crossed, so please push back. And they're not doing it.
On a pragmatic note, though, are they not partly doing that at least because they really, everyone is focused on peace for Ukraine and they're worried that pissing Trump off too much by saying, hey, you probably shouldn't have done that, might not be in their interest when it comes to Ukraine?
The calculus is clear, and some national political leaders are quite honest about it, not all of them, in saying we cannot afford to depart from this very delicate balance that we have been somehow reestablishing. That basically means Europe regaining a seat at the table in this peace negotiation. And at the same time, try not to piss Trump for going against what he's doing. But in reality, this is very short-termist and is also set to backfire because basically if Europe is not able to speak with one voice when its own territorial integrity is about to be breached, then it will be too late. So we are basically compromising on basic principles on the basis of an illusion that the US is still there to defend us if something is going to happen, be it in Moldova or in Estonia or in Finland, let's say on the eastern flank. But obviously this is very short-termist, and it's something that basically tells us that in their heart, our European leaders are still thinking that if Trump is going to lose popularity, is going to lose the midterm election, everything is going to be fine, everything is going to be back to the old world in which they grew up and they got elected the first time. And obviously, this is an illusion. Even if Trump departs tomorrow for whatever reason, I think not even a Democratic president, meaning a president coming from the Democratic Party, would be able to reestablish this world order that has been demolished by the very same country, the United States, that has contributed the most to set it up after the Second World War. So we have long passed that particular moment, and still we live in that particular illusion that it's possible to reestablish that world order.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because it feels like Europe spent most of 2025 in a long, drawn-out breakup or teetering on the brink of a breakup, which maybe has already landed in the US. And I wonder if you think that breakup will land in Europe in 2026.
If you think about what has happened in the past year, 2025 has been a very momentous and consequential year for the transatlantic relations, because signals have been coming in bits and pieces. We had the J.D. Vance vice president's speech at the Munich Security Conference. We had Pete Hegseth message on Signal saying how fed up it was to keep supporting and protecting Europe. Then we have the U.S. imposing high tariffs on Europe. But the shift then crystallized with the new U.S. national security strategy. And that document asks Europe to surrender its soul. It asks to stop regulating the market to protect Europeans, whether from climate breakdown or big tech, because this hurts American profits. It asks Europe to stop welcoming migrants, especially those who are not white, because this would be problematic for America. And then American securities guarantees then are made conditional on compliance with this kind of request, which by definition somehow encroach upon the sovereignty of Europe and the countries that make Europe. And despite all of this, there are still some European countries ready to pay allegiance to America, even today. If you think of Hungary, but also Giorgia Meloni in Italy. And those threats, which were only threats, as we enter 2026, have become policy. As of today, we can take it for granted that America is not only betraying Europe, but is currently threatening, because we have been identified as the enemy number one. Not Russia, not China, but Europe. So this is an ideological challenge that our former allies is clearly putting to us, as it is actually putting against other regions of the world. But the hate that the MAGA movement has developed vis-a-vis Europe is absolutely astounding. It is really Europe that stands against all the values that the MAGA world wants to destroy. This idea of pluralism, this idea of openness and solidarity and diversities as basic values that bring us together, they still do today, is clearly questioned.
I mean, looking specifically at Greenland, how much more nervous should the events in Venezuela make us about Trump's desire to take over Greenland?
I think regardless of whether these threats will materialize, the only fact that a NATO country like the US is currently challenging another NATO country member like Denmark, and by ricochet, the entire European Union, per se represents a red line being crossed. Is extremely difficult to even imagine how would that play out should the United States ever enter the Greenland territory with the idea to seize control. Obviously, the NATO agreement and alliance would fall immediately, because there would no longer be the trust needed to make it work, with enormous repercussions, not only in the relationship between America and the European countries, but also in the relationship between Europe and Russia in this particular historical moment, not to mention China. Basically, the message America is giving is a free pass to Russia to continue doing what it's doing in Ukraine and potentially other former satellites of the Soviet Union, but also to China, a free pass on going to Taiwan and potentially going over the little islands on the Pacific vis-a-vis Japan. So that's the message and the new multipolar world that international relations scholars have been conceptualizing for some time, a world in which we enter into a zero-sum game where one region gains some territory and another region loses. And we are really departing from this idea of multilateralism in which we can all collaborate and cooperate, because if we do this, everybody can gain at the same time. Some they're going to gain more, some other a bit less, but this idea is really put into question.
Let's talk about defense a little bit. We spent a lot of the last year vowing to get our act together as a continent when it comes to defense, and specifically being able to defend ourselves against further Russian attacks without American help. In one of our last podcasts of the year, we talked about how some European countries require 45 days advance notice before a tank from one of its neighbours can cross the border, although we are working on that. But yeah, we're not exactly agile right now. There is a lot to do before we can say that we are genuinely ready to fend off a Russian attack. Are you hopeful that even with everything else going on, there are concrete things that Europe is going to do this year to get us that little bit closer to readiness, given that all of the available intelligence suggests that Russia would be capable of attacking another European country after Ukraine in just a few years from now?
This is certainly the first time in modern European history in which the territorial integrity of Europe is threatened not only from the east, but also from the west. So the threshold is basically there for Europeans to start doing what they keep saying, which is to basically create the conditions for defending themselves. And yet, I don't think we've reached that threshold. I think I'm getting quite dramatic here. I really think that territorial integrity has to be breached somewhere. It could be on the east, meaning could be Finland, or could be Estonia, another Baltic country. It could be Greenland. But unless we go there, I don't think we're going to be seeing this quantum leap that will create the conditions that have always been necessary for European leaders to give up on sovereignty and basically make and deepen their integration. The entire history of European integration is made of these kind of accelerations driven by external facts, by external emergencies, crises. But that method has to be used again, and it has to deliver. And at the moment, the community method, this idea that leaders come together around the table and say, what is that interest? What is really threatening us all at the same time? Is not necessarily happening. And this is incredibly surprising and frustrating again, because Europe is one of the largest spender in defense. When you put together the national defense spending of all European countries, we are spending a lot of money. But as you have been alluding to, we are not coordinating. We are buying tanks and armaments that don't talk one another. They are not interoperable. And more critically, even if that particular territorial breach should occur tomorrow or after tomorrow, we have never addressed the key question, which is who is going to take the command of that form of coordination of defense that somehow will have to be triggered. And we have realized, because in Europe we are too honest, it's a bit like the Draghi report, right? We are self-inflicting this kind of diagnosis, and then we share it around. We even publicize it. We spent the last year telling everyone how weak we are in terms of infrastructure. So if we're going to be attacked on the west, we're going to be struggling to bring the army from the east to the west, and vice versa, because those infrastructures are not working, are simply not there. We are very good at diagnoses, but we are very bad at acting upon those kind of analysis. And again, I think that the $6 million question for 2026 is, what would it take? What has to happen to lead European leaders, national political leaders who are basically accountable only to their national electorate, to come together and to say, this is the time to be ready for that particular event? Because the only fact of coming together and providing that theoretical solution would create deterrence, both vis-a-vis the East and vis-a-vis America itself. And Trump only respects people, interlocutors who are able to project power. And that's exactly what we're not able to do. Which brings me to say that this is incredibly difficult to understand, because Europe has much more power that he acknowledged to have. Is incredibly wealthy. We're an incredibly wealthy region. We have been growing as much as America, despite all this data suggesting that our productivity rate is low. The thing is that the numbers suggest that America has been growing enormously because you have the top 1% that is absorbing most of this growth and those innovation. But then when you look at the average, it's pretty clear that this is not really spread across. So basically, America and Europe are economically equal. They are not so different. They spend 4% in defense. We spend 2% in defense. This is manageable. We can spend more, and we committed to spend more. So I think this is not the game. The game is to make it happen in order to project that kind of power we are not able to project at the moment, simply because we are not willing to share more of the power that is still held by national capitals.
Volodymyr Zelensky said in his New Year's address that the current peace deal on the table was 90% ready, which feels fairly optimistic in the grand scheme of things, even as the attacks from Russia continue. How hopeful are you that Ukraine might see peace in 2026?
I think Ukraine is now more a European problem than an American one. It has never become a global one because we know that most countries around the world have not considered or perceived that conflict as a global conflict, but only as a regional one. And Europe has been paying the check for the past year because basically since the return of Trump to the White House, it's Europe paying the bill. And quite miraculously, Europe realized that it was a better investment to continue supporting with this 90 billion support Ukraine than having to take care of the consequences stemming from a further invasion, a further occupation of the Ukrainian territory by the Russian. But this is only a patch. It's a patch that might allow both Ukraine and Europe to gain time, but is not necessarily leading to a definitive solution. It is true that these days we see that we are making advancement, but the real question remains, what are the security guarantees we can provide, we Europeans and others, including the UK, perhaps America, can guarantee to the Ukrainians? So it will be a key moment. I'm quite optimistic that both on the Ukrainian side and the American side, there is commitment to make something happen. We're only at the beginning of the year, but we see some developments suggesting that Ukraine is really the top priority for both America and the European Union these days.
Moving on from war to yet another depressing topic. Sorry about that. The rise of the far right. We saw something quite jarring happen at the end of last year, which was the mainstream centre-right within the European Parliament joining forces with the far right in order to weaken environmental regulations. There was quite a shocked reaction to this, but at the same time, it felt almost like an inevitability given how normalised the place of the far right in European politics is becoming. Do you think we're going to see more of this kind of thing this year?
I expect 2026 to be a crucial year for the European Union to decide what is its political balance, what is the political majority that is allowing it to go all the way to the next European elections. Up to now, we have two coexisting stories. The formal stories is that the current European Commission, the current European political priorities in Brussels and across the continent are very much driven by the mainstream parties that have been governing Europe since its inception. So the European Popular Party, the Socialists and the Liberals. But then we have the alternative story, which is probably closer to reality, that suggests that in reality, what is driving Europe, the political balance of Europe now, is already on the far right, meaning the three political groups that exist on the right of the European Popular Party. And the only group which is somehow responsible for this ambiguity or ambivalence is the European Popular Party, which is the party running the European Commission, running the European Parliament, and running the Council. When you look at the number of governments that are sitting within the European Council that belong to that political family. So it will be very much up to them to decide what they want to do, because this will be, I think, a key factor in defining which will be the political future for the European Union. What do we want to do when we become a bit more aged, because now Europe is clearly coming out of its infancy. It's becoming a bit more senior. We still call it the European integration a project, but after 70 years, you can question whether you're still a project, right? It's pretty much a resilient system that has been enduring many challenges, including those that are going to be coming in 2026. So we basically have to make some decisions regarding our future.
As you say, it's a bit much to describe Europe as still a project so many years after it started being a project. And as you said at the beginning of this conversation, something seems to be shifting in that the world is really talking about Europe as a unified actor. And that feels kind of new. There was this US national security strategy that was released at the end of last year, and it threw a lot of shade at Europe, making out that we're this depraved continent that censors free speech, apparently, and we've lost sense of who we are because we've tragically let too many immigrants in. Anyway, the point you make is that this document slags us off as a continent. It treats us as one. And if we want to be a bit more optimistic about the state of the world, maybe it's kind of a good thing that we're being treated as one these days?
I've been saying this in the past few months, that there's never been a better time to be a European, because I really feel genuinely that it's probably the first time in the past 50, 60, 70 years in which the world is looking at us as a one political entity, as a one political actor. They are treating us as Europeans, not as Germans, Poles, Swedes, Slovenians, or Spaniards, or Portuguese, but because we are European. We are a thing. Suddenly, Europe has become a thing. It has become a thing because it represents a threat, an alternative model, to systems that are so different than ours. It could be China, it could be Russia, it could be America this day, and therefore we are bothering them. So it's paradoxical that our enemies and rivals see Europe as more threatening and powerful than the European themselves. And that's what keeps me awake at night, but also gives me hope that finally, despite all this reticence of our political leaders to come together and to act and to defend, there is today a majority of European citizens who are actually unsatisfied by the state of the world. They are very proud of what Europe still represents today, because basically we have never been threatened so much and by so many actors. And I really feel it that 2026 might be that moment of reckoning, because our rivals are doing all they can do to actually create the conditions for Europeans to feel proud of themselves, and nurturing the ambitions to, first of all, protect the status quo because they like their lifestyle, but also because they want to maintain that particular level of protections and life that has been making them feel quite proud, quite secure, and projecting themselves in a world that was, up until a few years ago, quite mimicking Europe. It's no longer mimicking Europe, but when you look at the life conditions, and if you ask around where people want to spend time, it is pretty clear that Europe still has an incredible cultural attraction vis-a-vis other regions of the world.
And what do you think should be on European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's to-do list in 2026?
I think Europe has all the cards required to defend itself. We are the largest market in the world. Everybody dreams of entering and selling products and services to the European Union, and our consumers, and we need to use that power. So Europe could, first of all, and Ursula von der Leyen should suspend the trade agreement or trade deal it concluded with America. There's something that could be done. You should start encouraging countries to sell off US debt. You should extend membership to Greenland to become a member of the European Union. You should extend membership to Canada because there was some possible interest there. And all these actions together would be perhaps perceived as a form of trolling of America. It would be Europe telling America, if you fool around, if you keep exercising that kind of pressure, we're going to do the same. You're going to find out what Europe can do to you. Europe has much more power than we assume it has, both economically and financially, but also in terms of trade power, cultural power, that it exists and is respected around the world. All this belongs to Ursula von der Leyen prerogatives. She's the President of the European Commission, the only institution whose objective is to identify and promote the European public interest, which is not the sum of the national interest, but the interest of everybody. And her job is to identify that interest, not to compromise among national interests and to listen to the big countries or to some countries because they belong to her political party, but to do her job as they've been doing her predecessors, not only the famous Santer, but many other leaders who in the past were independent enough, probably up to Mr. Juncker, to say, this is the right thing for Europe. It might not be the right thing for Germany. It might not be the right thing for France, but it's the right thing for Europe. And that's what I think Ursula von der Leyen legacy will be judged against. Unless she will gain autonomy vis-a-vis the member states of the Union, her legacy will crumble as much as that of Angela Merkel, who day after day is perceived as possibly the major responsible for the current geopolitical mess in which we are in Europe, in particular in our relationship with Russia.
Well, as always, Alberto, you have given me so many fresh things to think about. And you've also helped us do that very good European thing of diagnosing the problem, but also given us some very good, paths to potential solutions. So thank you so much for joining us. Fighting through the jet lag. It's a real pleasure, as always, to speak to you. And we hope you have a great stay in Tokyo and that you come back to the Europeans very soon.
Thank you. Can't wait. Have a great year, all of you.